and welcome to the Daring to Dad podcast, where we're having conversations at the intersections of fatherhood, masculinity, faith. My name is Ryan Walton, and today we're diving into a powerful conversation with Zack Alexander, a leader and spiritual mentor whose work really bridges trauma integration, leadership, grounded spirituality. Zack's story is really remarkable. He gave up a full scholarship to a top law school to pursue a 6-year journey of self-discovery, healing, growth. And in this episode, we'll explore his path from working in a small wellness center to building an online presence, his thoughts on bridging gaps in mental health and spiritual wellness, and how social media has influenced conversations around trauma and masculinity. We'll also discuss some of the unique challenges men face in embracing their inner worlds, and the evolving definitions of things like healthy masculinity and Zack's mission to help individuals lead with depth and authenticity. So whether you're curious about spirituality, passionate about personal growth, or even navigating your own healing journey, this conversation has something for you. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's dive into my conversation with Zack Alexander. All right, here we are, coming to us from Mexico. Zack Alexander, man, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, it's been a couple of years. You and I, we met through a men's group through our mutual friend Rainier, and we were part of that for a while. But it's been a couple of years, man, and I thought we'd just start out by giving you a chance to introduce yourself in your own words about kind of what you're up to in the world.
Yeah.
I know you're online and doing a lot of amazing work, but just maybe give the listeners a bit of an insight as to who you are.
Yeah, it's funny. My name is Zack Alexander. I am a spiritual and leadership mentor. It feels like the terminology around what I call myself changes every podcast I jump on. So there's quite a bit of shifts going on, but I work at the level a lot around trauma integration, leadership, grounding spirituality or these spiritual concepts, but basically leading people and even men to their healthiest selves, and how we kind of become the change that we want to see in the world.
Yeah.
And so I've been, a little bit about my backgrounds. I gave up a full scholarship at a top law school to go into like this inner work journey. I've been on this for about 6 years, and every step of the way, it just feels like there's a new part to integrate, and that it's kind of growing and expanding in a different direction. And I'm just riding the wave of it all.
Man, it's been really cool to witness your evolution, at least on the other side of the screen through social media platforms and all those kinds of things and the work you're doing. And that's been a big medium for you, right? Is some of the stuff you've been doing on social media and reaching people. And is that how you're connecting a lot with people? Are you doing in-person groups? What does that work look like for you?
Yeah, the first couple years, I was working out of a small wellness center in St. Louis, Missouri, just because that's where I went to law school initially. And I was fully in person, doing a lot of trauma healing work. And eventually I transitioned to the online space. I was very fortunate that Dr. Nicole LePera, the holistic psychologist, who has something like 7 or 8 million followers now, started sharing my content when I had a couple hundred followers. And so I kind of blew up on Instagram initially in a way I wasn't ready for or expecting. And so I've been doing just really one-on-one work for 6 years now. I've recently kind of gone into finally the group workspace and online community space. But I've been, also training and teaching therapists and psychologists around the integration of kind of, some of the spiritual and energetic, but how it actually does integrate well with mainstream trauma healing and psychology. Just trying to find that bridge between all these worlds. What's missing from the spiritual wellness system? What's missing from the mental health therapy system? I've been in both. I see where they're both lacking, and to kind of fill that gap and fill that void.
Yeah. I have a questions about that. And I know this weekend, because, I know this podcast might come out and it maybe be a little while, but this weekend was the whole TikTok thing, right? TikTok shut down and it's bubbled up this whole conversation around social media, which I definitely want to talk about with you, because I think you're going to have some really powerful insights here.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I think it's so important, social media has given birth to conversations, especially in wellness and spirituality and a lot of psychological language and lingo and with this thrown around so much. And I'm curious, you talk about two things that words that go around that I would really like to get your insight on is spirituality and like trauma.
Yeah.
Like, what are those things for you, and how do you define what those are, right?
Yeah.
Before like we get into it, like why are those things important?
Yeah, well, I mean, so trauma, and I love the work of like Dr. Peter Levine and Gabor Mate. Trauma is just basically, just had to give them a shout out, is like any event or experience that we weren't able to process.
Hmm.
Okay. The trauma isn't in the event, essentially. It's just in that we did not have the capacity or the space to have our naturally occurring response that needed to move through us to that event. Okay.
Hmm.
But those pile up, right? Our nervous system gets stuck in fight or flight or freeze responses. We start hitting these walls in our lives. We can't relate to our world and other people the way that we're truly meant to. And it's like we have to go and revisit these parts of us that kind of got stuck and lost in time. Spirituality is this whole notion of like experiences that may actually transcend the logical self.
Hmm.
Okay, that kind of fall outside the realm of our five senses. I was atheist my whole life, and then I had an awakening where I just felt something beyond me kind of like, move through me and stepped into love, forgiveness. But I watched a lot of people have these quote unquote metaphysical experiences, like
Hmm.
whether it's through plant medicine, psychedelics sometimes, meditation. It's just like, oh my God, like I'm seeing or perceiving things that fall beyond just what I can see with my eyes. I'm feeling things that I can't fully make language of, and we're trying to understand what that world is.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times people probably think about trauma as like a really traumatizing event, right? The death of someone they love, or a car accident they were in, or people think about like a soldier coming back
Yeah.
from a war and having that kind of trauma. We think in those big moments, but I think what you're talking about is that it can happen in a wide range of events in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, look, I found my way into the sphere because I noticed what was lacking in my own journey, right? Like I was like almost a high school dropout, like I was behavioral issues, addiction, like you name it, I had it. And I was very lucky that when I was 20, 21, I had an illness, but I also linked up with a therapist who was able to guide me through a lot. And yes, I had what we would call big T traumas, but a lot of the dysregulation that existed within me was due to complex PTSD, which are
Mm.
just quote unquote like you weren't allowed to process like your emotional responses to anything, right? Or your version of reality was invalidated, but it happened so frequently that like the system becomes confused. This could potentially lead to ADHD. This could potentially lead to depression. These mental disorders. Sometimes they are genetic. Sometimes they are chemical, and sometimes there is like a physiological basis of like we weren't able to develop a sense of self correctly. Too much stress in the home environment, not the right support systems or space held from us, from community or parental figures, and there does become this disconnection of self, right? And so
Hmm.
it's bringing people back into that regulation, back into that connection, but it's not an overnight journey. So when you say like, how does this intermix with social media? I'm the type of guy that online will sometimes just chuck a textbook at people on Instagram, which is not like quote unquote good for the algorithm or whatever, but it is really to relay like this is a complex journey. It's not as simple as think more positive thoughts.
Yeah.
And this is what I see kind of lacking in the spiritual wellness space that I kind of have to get at sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I find it's really challenging because oftentimes the social media world and the space that we often live in and
Yeah.
consume information about our own, about psychology, about emotional, spiritual wellness, even probably like physical wellness and all these things. We take in these bite-sized chunks. A lot of it can feel like really prescriptive, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for complexity, for nuance, about understanding the stories and the lenses that we're bringing to it,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And that can be really, really hard. And like I see it in people, people that I know, you know, um, probably self-diagnosing themselves to a fault, or the people around them, their partners, their kids,
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff too. And how have you found maybe some things that found helpful getting into that complexity?
I mean, And my work is based around it, right? And so, I had to understand like trauma from a deep level. I had to understand what like internal family systems were, nervous system regulation were, shamanic like indigenous cultures, right? I mean, I had to really weave everything together and understand them on a deep level because people are deep and people are complex. I think people's stories and backgrounds are incredibly important. I think there's so much information there that we have to work with. And I know the pathologizing things or people diagnosing themselves with a million things. I just think we're working to understand that we're all people who are having physiological responses to our environment, to what's going on, and we're just working to understand ourselves on a deeper layer. I think social media is good for beginning to open a lane where we can have these conversations now. But I wouldn't be like confident in it giving you the prescriptive answers. Right.
Right.
Like I watch people be on social media too much in the wellness, mental health space and be like, I have this, I have that, I have that, and and this
Yeah.
I'm like, you're not, I don't even think you're in your body. Like, I don't know if you
Yeah.
like it's a balance, I feel.
Yeah, it 100% is. What I'd be interested to get your take on men in particular. I know this is a space we talk a lot about
Yeah.
fatherhood and masculinity and faith and where these things intersect, right? And where men kind of fall into all this. And I know that for a lot of guys that I worked with, been in groups with, some of these things we talk about trauma and spirituality. Like there's this wall,
Yeah.
right? That like you start talking about these things and you see some eyes glaze over, or you get to see guys physically uncomfortable in their bodies with like, oh my gosh, what am I going to get into? What are some of those walls, man, and why do those exist in your perspective? And then maybe we can talk about like how we're breaking through some of those.
I mean, yeah, it was a huge struggle in my journey. There became a point, several years ago where it became very clear that my journey had to go like more deep inside myself. It's almost why the spiritual element came in because I wasn't willing to like do it, and it was like you got it. Something came in, it was like you got to do it, and I was like,
Yeah.
And I will tell you, like the male experience in our Western world is different. Like it is different. It is based on performance and getting shit done. And then you're telling people to go into their internal world, which may inhibit you from showing up correctly, or you're having an emotional response that may make people feel uncomfortable. And like, some of the notions around this is men always have to get it together. We always have to understand. We always have to control. We always have to predict. And then you're stepping into an internal environment that can be unpredictable.
Yeah.
That is this new terrain. Like we always have to be competent and know what we're doing, but like we weren't raised to understand how to work with our internal world, like the way men are in like maybe say indigenous cultures. So like when we bring up these notions of trauma and spirituality, it feels like this wild card and we don't understand the incentive, So of course, like we're subconsciously like shut down. Like I'm at a place of my life now where like I've benefited immensely from doing this work. But those first 2 to 3 years were not, I was like asking myself and looking up at the sky, like, well, I don't understand the purpose. Like, this is like my life shattering, like for me doing this. Why couldn't I just, take my prescription medications and just numb out and do what I need to do? Like, this doesn't make sense. So, I mean, the male psyche fights this process because in its little algorithm and equation, it does make sense to do so.
Yeah. I think there was a long time, when I first got into this work and I'll be honest, I didn't understand all that. And I didn't understand, I think I was hard on guys. I've always kind of naturally felt comfortable in like my emotions, sharing kind of what's going on internally for me. And I think that there was a line, it was only really, man, until like after like I went through like a divorce and went through some really tough shit in my own life that I began to maybe understand why, men are like that in the first place, and why like thousands of years of, programming in guys have caused us to live that way and to be this way. And I think now, like, I'm like really sympathetic to guys in that place, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, keep going. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Like, I was just saying, like, I think there's a lot of like stuff out there, just like really quick statements. You'll say, oh, why can't guys be more like emotional, or why don't guys cry more, or this and this and that. And I honestly used to be in that camp a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with guys? But I don't know, man. As I've journeyed in and sat with more men and really sat in, I really understand why we're there in the first place, and it's legitimate. Like there's legit reasons why like we're in that spot. There's these cultural, relational, like psychological reasons why, and it was only really when I started to understand that, you know, and the wiring within guys, and that hey, being that way served a purpose for an incredibly long time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And all of a sudden now it's like, boo, it literally like in the past however many years, now it's like, okay, guys, now you have permission to
Yeah.
like to do this thing.
Yeah.
And it takes a while, I think, for us as a collective to kind of catch up to that. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, you're asking men to rewire like 5,000 years of programming.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we would only just look into like our grandparents' generations. I mean, you know, they were either in World War One, World War Two, the Vietnam War. They were
Yep.
going through the Industrial Revolution, where they're going to a factory and having to
Yeah.
do this just to make ends meet. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I grew up and my grandpa used to tell me stories about like how he like cut open a Nazi in World War II, like in a battleground. I don't think there was like space. I'm 5, by the way. I don't
Yeah,
think there's
right.
like I'm like, oh, okay, like, that's,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. And like, you know, my other grandparent used to like box in the Navy, beat the shit out of people, and so like, there's and then so like there was no space for them to have emotions, like there was no
Yeah.
space for them to have feelings. They had to get shit done, you know. I mean, there's a lot of unprocessed war trauma like
Yeah.
with our older male generations, and
Yeah.
so and now we kind of live in a different society and paradigm where like men are in cubicles and doing like remote work, and it's just and they're challenged to go these deeper places within themselves and understand themselves, and this hasn't been an opening for us forever.
Yeah.
Right. And so like my psyche, I would watch my psyche, and my psyche was like, I will not do this. I'm like, I don't know, I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
so it's programming and wiring that makes sense that we have to like speak to and validate, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's tough for me to look at guys who like I know like, you know, should be Vikings, and now they're in and they're beautiful people, and they're stuck in, you know,
Yeah.
selling whatever. And I'm like,
Sure.
we gotta find a way to balance this,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
interesting. Dude. I was had this experience, and where I was walking with a woman,
yeah,
and probably people are maybe a lot of people are familiar with this kind of unspoken rule. But you know, when you're walking down the street, there's this kind of old school chivalrous thing that you do where the man walks on the side of the street,
Yep.
right? Keeping the woman further away from the cars so that the man would die first if
Yeah.
there was a car coming.
yeah,
And like I noticed, but I remember this woman being really adamant about that.
Mm.
That and it's this really interesting thing because when I think about that, when I really step into it, what that little rule is about is saying man must be willing at all times to sacrifice his life
yeah,
and be prepared to do that. Okay, that you have to have a certain psychology for that.
yeah,
You gotta have to have a certain amount of like turn off my emotional response to this and do what must be done type of mentality. And that is like I think a micro example about what kind of the space that men have occupied for a long
Yeah.
time. And now, and it's not that, hey guys, hey, walk closer to the road. I'm not saying don't do that kind of thing, but it's an example of the kind of psychology that we have to have, and
Yeah.
an understanding and an empathy for that kind of being in conjunction with what we're talking about is also exploring like ourselves and emotions and our inner world. Do you know, like it's a really interesting place for guys to be at, and I understand some of the confusion and the struggle with this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I gotta be honest, I don't think, you know, the men standing on the side of the road is wrong, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like, but yeah, it's being able to balance that like protector, provider energy with like the being in contact with the emotional world.
Yeah.
And there's reasons for it too. I mean, back in the 40s and 50s, men were providers, they were protectors, and like the rates of domestic violence, I mean, I have to go to ChatGPT, was way higher. The guys would not
Hmm.
know what to do, and they come home and there was nothing masculine about beating the shit out of your partner, right? And
Right.
so like there's clear like there has to be a better integration of being able to work with your emotional world while still being a provider, protector. Like I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong in the traditional masculine roles, but we're going higher now, so to speak. And
Yeah.
like there's room and space for you now to look at deeper and more intricate aspects of yourself and to have greater depth.
Right.
Um, and still, but still hold that. Like, still, can you still hold that provider and protector? Can you
Yeah.
still create a relationship with your emotions where they're organized and coherent to some degree? I do say that, like, I feel like men are on a little bit of a different path than women when it comes to this journey, and that's something that I had to learn. Uh,
Yeah.
and enlisting like the right like men's mentors was like really big for me, and like being challenged and poked in the right way, and that is the fatherhood energy, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
son, I'm gonna
Mm.
let you struggle. Right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you struggle. Like, you're
Yeah.
gonna fall off the bike. I can't save you from that, but like
Yeah.
I'm here holding space for this to occur so you can lift yourself up.
Yeah.
And there's something really beautiful about that when it's done correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you said it so well. It's this integration. And we're not sacrificing this part of ourselves that maybe is in us to be a provider, protector, that kind of thing, but it's an opportunity for us to explore more holistically our whole selves,
Yes.
right? And that can feel big, for people, and I totally get it. I want to get your take just while we have time. This weekend was this whole like TikTok shutdown thing, and I think in the last couple hours it's been turned back on, and this has been a big thing for me in recent times, is the impact of these social media platforms on some of the things that you talk about, right? Is spirituality and healthy, the healthy whole person and trauma and all these things. I feel like more than ever, maybe this is me getting older,
Yeah.
that I'm finding myself wanting to spend less time on these platforms and get outside and see people, like feel people's energy in person.
Yeah.
But these things are consuming our lives and informing so much about the kind of people that we're becoming and the information that we take in. How do you find with people you work with and groups you work with, how these things are beginning to impact people? Maybe in particular some of the men you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the social media and like and how it's like impacting them and things like
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's tough. I have a very love-hate relationship with social media, even having like the platforms I do, because like, man, when I was going through what I was going through initially with uncovering all this trauma, and then there's a spiritual awakening and all this, and
hmm
like, no one around me knows like, can I curse on this one? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, go ahead.
You're like what the fuck is happening to me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
For me to find some people on social media who like were able to speak to it,
yeah,
like
yeah.
that was
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
beyond helpful, And I would initially post stuff around ego death or dark night of the soul or why this process was different for men. And I'd have people come to me and be like, dude, thank you. Like you gave language to something that I was left alone and thought I was bad for or crazy,
hmm
Um, and then like there is just so much noise online,
hmm
right? And I mean, being in the healing wellness space is a quasi like I'm like a D-minus wellness influencer, but like I have to make a post about this, and I have to speak like my life experience now has to be quantified into like this box that I just
Yeah.
put myself. Like it does feel like also unhealthy, and
Yeah.
I think there's a way that I've had to learn how to use social media correctly because sometimes we see in the sphere it's like we use social media to show how awesome my life is. And so you need to invest in me because my life is so awesome. I can give you a life this awesome. You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hate that.
You're having to sell
Right.
yourself a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but it's
Yeah.
also like that feels very seedy energy. And I would say like I've had a lot of people come in who have issues. Oops, I have a lot of people come in who have like issues because they're like I felt social media is telling me I need to be making this much money or I need to look like this or I need to be this masculine or don't get me started on the
Yeah.
anti stuff. And it's like no, like just be you. Like this stuff is here to figure out how you can be more of yourself. Like don't listen to that. So I feel like social media can sometimes be used as a tool that shames people,
Mm-hmm.
like in a way of you're not enough this, why don't you have this, da 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 this, and I feel like that can be very parasitic and insidious. I think it can dumb down what this process is sometimes, right? So there is definitely a concerted effort to make sure when you're on there that like you're utilizing it with the right intention and to educate and inform appropriately, and not to scream down someone's throat. Like you have to look at it like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I feel that. Like as much work as like I've done and like I'm in this space of, leading others and helping others, I find myself caught up in all that shit too. Like,
Yeah.
the comparison game and, what makes a man. And we have, I think, now maybe even more with who's like controlling the messages, right? Like we see this rise on right now of like who the models are, because it goes back to what you were talking about before about like what does it look like to be like a healthy like man and embrace this more holistic view of who we are as people, like not just these three things, but we have this opportunity to integrate so many other aspects of ourselves into what it means to be a man. And a lot of times what that takes is the models,
Yeah.
right? And right now, I think, especially online, are propping up certain models of men in our culture. When I say culture, I think maybe particularly in the like the U.S. right now,
Mhm.
and we're on here talking like one day before the presidential inauguration,
Yeah.
and so that's a big topic right now. Is these models, and a lot of times it's just guys with the most money,
Yeah.
the most political influence. It's the Elon Musk, it's the Donald Trump, it's the Zuckerberg guys
Yeah.
are getting this like, you know, huge platform to tell us about what masculinity is. How's that impacting us, man?
I mean,
Or would you even agree with that? Maybe you're like, I don't agree. There's other models out there, but maybe like,
like you're saying,
yeah,
like
what's your take?
the big figures, like getting on social media and saying like that this is what masculinity is.
Yeah, and just the influence and the kind of leadership being modeled from men right now in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have great models that are in front of our face, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say this, like I have found good models on social media as well. So it's tough, like, but they may not be as flashy or as,
Mm-hmm.
a big voice. Like Connor Beaton, who does Man Talks, is one that I think I got on and was like, oh, this guy's great.
Yeah, Connor's great. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
But like, yeah, in terms of like the big faces, the big, the Elon Musk, I gotta be honest, the
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trumps, and the Joe Bidens, like whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to say.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
are they examples of healthy masculinity that we're being exposed to all the time? No. Did I have to have conversations with younger men sometimes about Andrew Tate and like let them hold space for that? Like, yeah, I did. Some of these models of like if you're a man, like you're gonna kill it, you're gonna have the car, you're gonna have the this, you're gonna have the that, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
real masculinity is. How many girls do you have? And it's like that's not. I actually don't think that's healthy masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So there definitely is a lot of bullshit I think that young men are exposed to in front of quote unquote the upper tier,
Mm-hmm.
male leaders or whatever that we
Yeah.
have to work through.
Yeah. And I understand like the draw to some of that and like,
Yeah,
the wealth and the power and the money and like I mean it's like take someone like Elon Musk. I mean the guy's like the wealthiest man in the world building fucking like rockets and shooting them into
yeah,
space. I mean, everything that you kind of dream of is like you're this little boy like he's doing in like real life and there's this draw to that. And I just think it's interesting to ask questions that, I mean we're talking about like who's modeling this,
yeah,
like who's modeling this type of integration of like physical, spiritual, emotional, psychological well-being, like for men and the way that we are taking care of the world, right? Taking care, we talk about being a protector and provider. Who is protecting and providing truly for the people from a male leadership perspective? And you're right, man. There are some guys doing some incredible work out there. And, you mentioned Connor and,
yeah.
you can put yourself and people like yourself in that category. But from like a huge, global perspective, I think we're lacking there.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, like when it comes, I wasn't really finding this that much from social media. Like, and I feel like the male voices right now that are being amplified, that are seen the most on the television, I would not use them as examples of this healthy, integrated masculine. I just wouldn't. I've had to go back into history books from like a young age. I was guided to study Abraham Lincoln and Nelson Mandela a lot. And as I've gone through like my own inward journey of what does it mean to be a healthy man, like they've been flashing up more and more for me of like, oh, like this existed before. Like it's
Yeah.
not now. We don't have that now necessarily, but like, oh, but there has been these examples of these really healthy men that were, obviously they both like admitted to being guided spiritually, though not being overly religious and going through deep, deep hardship and trauma and still stepping up and doing what was best for the world and putting themselves aside and having the internal strength and resolve to hold that. I mean, it's a real beautiful thing. I don't think we see the model of that as often now. But that's a collective attitude that we're going to have to shift. Like I don't know if someone like Lincoln would rise up to a presidency in modern America, right, when he was having mental breakdowns and could even be classified as having mental illness. Like, would we allow a leader like that who's been vulnerable, who's had difficulties, right? Who isn't quote unquote the always stoic male, would we still hold space for someone like that to lead us?
Mm,
And so, yeah, I do think it is redefining our notion of what is masculine, that like men are taken to like the sewers within themselves. They will have messy responses. Space has to be held for that. And that will actually make them a more effective leader down the line. That'll actually make them a more healthy, integrated male down the line, not less.
yeah.
I'm not here to talk about like who's your favorite politician or whatever, but like
Sure. Yeah.
Donald Trump, I mean, it does isn't different than other male leaders I've seen before of like, look how awesome I am, like the bravado, the ego, and like
Yeah.
I I I don't think that's always coming from an integrated space, right? At least in men, and so
Yeah.
I think he's reflecting back to us some of our own misguided notions of what it is to be a strong man, and I
Hmm.
believe that we're learning on what that really means. But there is absolutely like historical examples to pull from. We just have to be willing to look back a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think I do feel like there's this need for a really embodied leadership, that's I don't think either side of the political spectrum right now in this country is exhibiting, right? Like
Yeah,
I saw this thing where it's like just the LA fires have been happening, and there was this retweet, it was a Donald Trump retweet, and it was basically LA on fire and the Hollywood sign, but it changed the words to like Trump was right, and it was like LA burning, and he was like this retweet, and I'm like, what? I'm like, I was just like, what if? Because for me, an embodied leadership instead of that would be like, hey, listen, I know that the people in California, many people in California, and I haven't always seen eye to eye.
yeah,
However, as your leader, like I am here to help and support you because you are human beings.
yeah,
And as a leader of like this country, I care about you.
yeah.
Like, can you imagine like that, the difference, you know?
No, of course, yeah,
And yet it's like people are like, fuck yeah.
yeah,
And so I'm like, I don't understand, bro. And even for me, like even some of the people who prop that up are like people who are online, especially in like the kind of manosphere space, who are all about like self-optimization and like all these like, and I'm like, how do these things all like fit together? I'm really, really confused. And I think it is a confusing message for a lot of guys, and so trying to figure that out, and I'm picking on like Donald Trump right there, but I
yes.
know that on the other side as well, it's like there's plenty of things you can point out on the other side also that are the opposite of embodied leadership.
Oh yeah, I mean,
But
listen, yeah, I want to touch on. I mean, I definitely think it's a misguided notion of what power is or what power looks like. I think of men if I shout the loudest, right, that means I'm the most
yeah,
powerful. If I have the
uh,
most stuff, that means I'm the most powerful.
yeah,
Um, and this isn't even take a jab at Trump, like, but I think this is something within the collective male psyche where it's like power can come through differently. Like
hmm,
like someone like a Nelson Mandela was in, I visited Robben Island, like he was in prison for like 27 years. And like they thought he was going to start like a race war when he got out because like his because of his oppressors putting him in, and he
Right.
united the country through compassion and forgiveness.
Hmm.
Like unified a
Yeah.
country on the brink of racial civil war. Like that's powerful. Now the male psyche right now collectively doesn't necessarily connect with that as power, but that's the most powerful thing one could do,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
And so it's I think we're working through a little bit of like the immature boyhood masculine. I think men are all doing that. Like it's kind of, you know,
Mm.
warrior magician lover, like being stuck in a little bit of boyhood psychology. It was like, yeah, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so I think it's something that we're seeing, and we're working through it. But like, I definitely, I think, I just want to speak on this too. I think the left has incredibly weak masculine leadership. I think, they're
Hmm.
the ones who
Yeah.
I see pander and this and that and don't take real stands, or it feels
Yeah.
like a little bit of like a performative. And so,
Sure. Yeah.
we're working towards finding that middle ground. But like, I definitely see some really healthy male leaders around me, and I also feel the fear of like there's not place for me in a public sphere. Like I have to like
Yeah.
become statistical or become this, and it's like it's
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. It's almost like if I don't say something crazy or like outlandish, or if I don't have a hot take on this or that, like the algorithm's gonna forget about me or all this kind of stuff, and that's why it like feels like, oh my gosh, I have to say this thing, I have to take a stance, and
Yeah,
then you're like, oh crap, well that's where we lose what we're talking about at the very beginning of our conversation is complexity. Like,
yeah,
man, like there is so much that is like it's not really this, it's not really that, it's a little bit of all these things,
yeah.
and it's so important.
No, I mean that's where I think social media reduces these conversations where people are getting inaccurate perceptions of things. Everything has to be a soundbite. The more polarizing you are, the more the algorithm's going to like you. I mean, the last couple years I haven't posted as much because I'm like, I don't know how to feed this appropriately. I don't know. I'm not going to make a fucking spectacle of myself for this thing
Yeah.
to do this. I'm not going to say something extreme,
Yeah.
trendy. And so yeah, sometimes I think social media promotes like the worst of us. Not always,
Yeah.
but like, and that
Yeah.
and that definitely, is difficult, right? Anything that incites a deep emotional response or reaction, but doesn't necessarily mean it has value or wisdom. And
Right.
so I think that's kind of where we're stuck now. And we'll see. I mean, it's tough. Instagram and
Yeah.
TikTok are both
Yeah.
ugh, you know.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a tough space. I know. I after going through a divorce, I stepped away. Like, just I turned off
Yeah.
all the lights on my social channels. Lost like
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of followers just because I just went dormant.
Yeah.
And I needed time in my own life. I needed to I needed to heal. I
Yeah.
needed my own space. And so, but coming back to it, I really saw things in new light. And one of those things
Yeah.
was the way that I felt like I was continuing. We talked a little bit about this before, was continuing to feel like I had to sell like myself. I mean that's the algorithm, right? Like so much is like,
Yeah.
oh, like look how wealthy I am, look how strong I am, look how
Yeah.
great I am. You want this life too? Sign up for my 90-day program. Like that's like the like and I'm like, man, I don't want to be on here, in particular my space with fatherhood and working with
Yeah.
dads was like, I'm not interested in like convincing people about my ability to be a dad. I'm
Yeah.
passionate about helping others see theirs,
Yeah.
see their potential. But in order to get out there and get in front of it, I have to like post the perfect family picture and
Yeah.
do the little thing and the little song and dance in order to play the game. I think after a while, it just gets really exhausting. It's really, really exhausting.
It is, so it's interesting you said that because like the last, especially someone too, at a platform, like there's all this noise around me sometimes, like, bro, why aren't you posting every day? They're like, grow,
Right,
for like the
right.
last years, and
Yeah,
like my system for a while, so like, dude, I need to step the fuck off. Like I
yeah,
can't
yeah,
handle this. Like it's really affecting and impacting my like
yeah,
psychological. I'll
yeah,
take some clients, I'll post, bring some people in, and that's it. And like it's
yeah,
terrible from a business model, but like for a time, that's what I needed.
yeah,
And like I
yeah,
said, it's always like, I mean, I've been like this from the beginning I got on, but I've always been like, if you're going to invest in me because of how cool my life is, like that's pretty dumb. Like I was like, I remember I started off this, I was like, I live in a shitty apartment in St. Louis. There's mold in my apartment. I'm young. I'm
yeah,
28, 29, right? Like I mean, I've been so traumatized. I'm still working through shit. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I will understand you because I've been through these layers to myself. But like, if you want like a superficial thing, I'm the wrong person to go to. But
Yeah.
like the fact that my business built from that shows how desperate people were to hear that from someone, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I've said this for a while, but like I feel like influencer culture is dying online, and I think it's a good thing. I think, I think the thought leaders of tomorrow are going to be those who are just wise and have depth and who are saying what's not going to be said. And it's not really about how they look or what they have. We may not even know that,
Yeah.
it's just we can feel the depth and wisdom in their soul and in their words, and that's enough.
Yeah. You said I remember you said this recently. I think it was online,
Yeah.
and because I want you to dive into what you just said a bit more, that maybe for the past couple of years, and maybe I'm thinking paraphrasing kind of your posts from this might have been a couple weeks ago, that there's a lot of this stuff when you said influencer culture and kind of writers and thinkers, that there's been a lot of like this positive things, and there have been these platitudes like, one day, 20 years from now, you are going to wish that you had done this one thing or said this
Yeah.
one thing. And like, that's the thing. It's just kind of these like lofty phrases or sayings or quips. I don't know but that we're searching for more than that right now.
Oh, I mean, for sure. I mean, look, as someone who's suffered through chronic depression, when I get the spiritual wellness influencers and like depression is just like you are just in and you have to think this, I'm like, please shut up. Like you
Yeah.
have no a concept or idea about
Yeah.
like what this is. You're just not embodying love enough. It's like it's deeper than that. But thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think I watch people getting very like turned off. They're getting very agitated and annoyed with this very surface level help of like, if you just thought like this, it would all be better. Invest in
Mhm.
my program, and in a month it'll all be different. And that's not realistic.
Yeah.
It's just not. And you're selling people a pipe dream, and people are starting to wake up to the bullshit.
Yeah.
And it is important to speak to complexities. It is important to speak to what's going on. I mean, there's and it's important. I mean, this is a switch and transition that I made like a year and a half ago. But like I'm a Jewish dude, and when the stuff in Palestine occurred and October 7th occurred, like I was like, I have to use my platform to talk about this, and I
Yeah.
have to speak at it from a trauma lens and this stuff, and I need to say what people aren't saying. And like I would hope that like that's more of the paradigm moving forward, right? That
Hmm.
like it's not just saying that the simple quick thing, but it's like it's looking at deeper societal issues, it's looking at deeper mental health issues, it's willing to speak to things that aren't being spoken to, and to validate people. Like this is a lot, but like, hey, we're gonna give you an insight, and we're gonna work you deeper to the truth without pretending like we have the truth in a 1 minute soundbite. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard to do it in that short time. And there's this sense today that like we step back from leaning into some of those things because the world feels like it's almost like, the Roman Colosseum
Yeah,
where it's all based on the crowd reaction. Thumb up, thumb
yeah,
down.
yeah,
Like, we're making things now and we're
yeah,
saying things now based on what's going to get the thumb up or the thumb down. Whether it's going to get the thumb up comments, a thumb down, whether, like it's all about the whims and the ebbs and flows of the mass,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so we back away and we begin to kind of change based on what this thing here I said got me more views and
yeah.
more likes, and this thing didn't. Wow, it feels really good to get like, be liked, and so it begins to kind of change maybe what we say and lean into something comfortable like you're talking, or lean into something uncomfortable like you're talking about, and I can see that really influencing how people, especially in like areas of incredible importance like mental, emotional, like psychological well-being,
Yeah.
how that begins to shift what we say and put out there. It's very tempting to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, because everyone wants to go viral,
Yeah.
right? Because like if you go viral, like here's all the clients, here's all the money, so let me say something. So it's definitely a test of character to like not just put something out for like the thumbs up or the this, and like really speak truth to something,
Hmm.
and understand that it might upset people, people might be angry, people might not understand.
Yeah.
But like I feel like that's almost its own test in growth and evolution for people to be willing to say the hard thing, even if some aren't going to like it, even if the algorithms won't pick it up, and to trust that you'll get to where you need to go. And that's I mean, the more that I've tried to hop off social media completely and say this, I don't ever want this to be a thing. Like for myself, I felt an internal guidance of like, no, like you're gonna have to pop on, but like, ground and center your voice, because it is important to have like things that need to be said of this nature said, that this has to be out there. But yeah, it's tough because it is the crowd, it is the thing that makes us excited, say the thing,
Right, right.
and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I have to find a way that that's still true and it still has meaning and people will listen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's definitely a tough space to be in. And I feel that too, even though my space even is much smaller navigating it, but yeah, it's complex. Last kind of topic as we kind of move into the end is you talk a lot about spirituality. You're a spiritual guy.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about defining like what that is at the beginning, but it feels like this is a space where there is interest. I know for me personally, like I bring some baggage to that word and that space because of my own like religious upbringing
Yeah.
and being able to separate some of what, these larger conversations about spirituality on, I think some guys, and I'll probably even put myself in this camp, and I have been at times, kind of looking at the ends of the spectrum. There's like
Yeah.
the hardcore like religious institution that maybe you grew up in, the fundamental like Christian or Catholic, church, and you
Yeah.
don't want that. And then you see the other end of the spectrum where you feel like, oh, it feels like a lot of like woo woo stuff that I don't really understand, and like language that like I feel like I don't connect to.
Yeah.
How do we help people navigate those two perspectives when it comes to talking about spirituality and the importance of that?
I mean, I think you just meet people where they're at, and I'm someone who's like, driven themselves near on the wall of insanity in the spiritual exploration journey, because, it gets cool when you're on a psychedelic and you see some things, and then it's not so cool anymore. But like, it's meeting people where they're at and creating a space and container where they feel open to have their experiences. I have to work with religious trauma a lot. I have to work with there are systems and institutions that were based on shame and fear and like control around this concept of a higher power. Like we have to deconstruct that. And then, in the spiritual spaces, you have sometimes people who are using these mechanisms as a way to escape and avoid things. I mean, I remember like going to certain being told that like I chose my abuse, my soul chose my. I'm like, that's not what I need to fucking hear right now, even if that was true or not true. Who knows if it is? Like this is ridiculous. And so I do think it's holding a space where people can explore things, but like I always use the word of integration. Like, how does this integrate into your daily life? How is it helpful to you? What has it enhanced for you? What does it allow you to see that you feel you needed to see? How does it help your understanding of yourself? I really feel that it goes back to a deeper concept of like, what does this mean for me? And being open to that. Spirituality was something that I think helped me connect more deeply into an intuitive awareness that I needed. When I was going the lawyer route, like I was just very unhealthy. Like I was gaggling Adderall like crazy. I was not looking out for my health. Like I was like, right. And I had this awakening. It was like, you gotta step out. You gotta look at yourself. You gotta look after yourself, and if you got to feel these things that you're avoiding feeling, and it took a literal spiritual experience from that to come into contact with me. And so I believe it's important, but we just have to understand the why and the how of how it's happening and what it's showing, and let it just be that. I'm in Mexico. I am 30 minutes north of Tulum, and in the year and a half I've been here, I've stepped foot in Tulum one time for a few hours. I stay away, and they're big on the conscious communities here. I stay away from spiritual spaces a lot. I do stay away from conscious communities a lot. I figure out what feels good for me, and I let the rest just be. So I also think of like, just because you had a spiritual experience does not mean you have to just throw yourself into this, I'm spiritual now, and I'm gonna have the medallions and the beads.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really forming your own relationship and what feels right and best for you.
Yeah, I think it's important to hear. Like for a lot of people, there's a sense of like, practicality, and impact of that. And making some of that stuff less intimidating.
Yeah.
And, yeah, man, I mean, I'll hear some people, I'll come across stuff and people are talking about spirituality. I'm like, I mean, I'm a, former pastor and, I've delved into a lot of like spirituality stuff. I'm like, I have no idea like what they just said,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
because it can feel like just a lot of smoke.
Yeah.
And so I love what you're saying about like starting where you're at and what moves in you and what helps expand your own understanding of yourself and the world and other people. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll let you go. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say I know we're coming up on time, and I really appreciate the time that you've carved out for being on this podcast, man. And it's good to reconnect with you again. You're in Mexico, but you're still doing work. You're working with individuals. People can connect with you, right?
Yeah, I have actually an online community I just opened that comes with a phone app. It's called Wayshowers Collective, and it's just an app for healers, seekers, leaders to like kind of come in and explore some things together and to create that space where anything goes. But yeah, I have that space. There's weekly calls that I lead, but also like it's a very horizontal hierarchy of leadership. Everyone inputs, and then I have my one-on-one work, which is the Leaders Pathway, which is like a 6-month container that are pretty intensive. Sessions last 2 hours long, but I work with individuals who are looking to blend these worlds of healing and spirituality and self-development and self-improvement. But like, how do we actually create substantive change in our worlds, our environments? Like, what are you looking to bring to the world? And how do we get you into a place where like you can hold that and bring that?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, definitely drop some of the links to those spaces and the show notes here if you're interested in checking those out. And obviously people can connect with you on like social, right?
Yeah,
Instagram.
We're not going to throw out the TikTok.
TikTok, maybe now, maybe later, a little bit. Who knows?
I am Zack Alexander, Zack with a K, and you'll find me.
Dude, that's amazing, man. Dude, this is great. It's good to reconnect with you after a couple of years and see, man, just witnessing your own growth and seeing kind of what you're up to has been a real joy. So I'm really proud of the work that you're doing. So thanks for sharing a bit of it with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, we'll talk more soon. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.